So it's a huge mistake to assume that your product is going to sell itself. So the reality here is that getting into grocery is step number one, and keeping your spot on the shelf is what really matters. So a mistake that I see is brands assume retailers are going to sell their product and push their product for them, when in reality, the stores are expecting you, the brand, to drive your own sales.
This episode is proudly brought to you by Mapper Forward's workshop. It's time to become a coffee consultant. Learn how to diversify your revenue streams and create freedom from your day job while saying goodbye to that alarm clock forever by becoming a consultant within the coffee industry or directly to consumers who have shifted towards home brewing and home roasting. Protect your income from challenging times in the coffee value chain by taking this course today. Go to mapperforward.coffee/workshops or click the link in the show notes for details. Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro by Map It Forward, friends. I'm your host, Lee Safar, and this is episode 2 of a 5-part series with Allison Ball from Retail Ready. We are talking about coffee and grocery. In the last episode, we talked about where grocery ecosystem is at the moment. And in this episode, we're going to talk about a lot of mistakes that people are making when they're trying to get into grocery. And I witnessed this firsthand when I was trying to get my RTD beverage, Elixir Specialty Coffee, into grocery stores. And I just was one of these people who was like, well, this is a really fancy RTD and it's its own category. And so, of course, the grocery stores will want it. No, that's not how it was. And that was my first foray into this is fucking hard and this is not for everybody. And everybody needs to understand the way that this ecosystem works. And then when they were starting to say to me, well, we need a pallet of free product for every store that we want to get this into. That was about a $50,000 investment for me in every store. And it just did not make any sense. We were making more money through the e-commerce store than we were doing that. And that was a really, I'm really glad that I made that decision and I didn't suffer from FOMO that way, and saved myself as a business owner from making that mistake. But I know of a lot of people who use that as their marketing plan. I'm going to get into grocery, I'm going to spend a fuck ton of money, and that's going to be my marketing. So the question that I have for you is, what are some of the mistakes that you've seen in specifically the coffee category that brands have made when going into grocery?
Yeah, gosh, I'm like, we've got so many mistakes here. Buckle up, please. Okay, we touched on this a bit in episode 1, this last episode, but thinking that your really great coffee is enough to get you on the shelves. Right. So I want to emphasize this again, that the reality is that grocery buyers don't care that much how delicious your coffee is. They care if it's going to sell. And so the mistake here is that in the sales pitch, brands focus too much on their sourcing practices, their process, their farmer relationship, as they're doing their pitch. But they fail to prove that there's a demand for their product on the shelf and that it's going to sell off the shelf once they're there. And Lee, usually this is where people get mad at me, right? And they're like, well, Alli, like, you told me to tell them that I'm a Black-owned coffee roaster. You told me to tell them that I'm a woman-owned business. Like, we really do pride ourselves in our farmer relationships. Like, where can I tell that story? And I always remind our Retail Ready students that you lead with the picture of sales success first. We got to capture their attention and convince them that we are going to sell first. And then we can connect with them on the emotional level of why we're doing all this good in the world and why our brand truly is thoughtful from A to Z. And so really thinking, like shifting your thinking here from my delicious product is enough to get me on the shelf to I got to have a sales story, like a numbers story that convinces the buyer to give me a shot. And then I can win them over with the heartfelt side of my brand. And Lee, I think one of the reasons why this mistake happens is because coffee roasters often do a lot of direct to consumer business, or you have a cafe and you're talking face to face to the end user. And that works when you're selling to the end consumer. And that's great, right? I want your listeners to keep doing that when you're selling direct to consumer. Yeah. Like talk up your sourcing, talk up your process, like all of that sort of stuff. But when we're pitching to wholesale buyers, we just slightly shift that, the way that the order in which we have that conversation. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I guess what you're saying is the buyer wants you to lead with business reasons before you lead with your social impact and all of the other reasons why you should be doing business with them.
Absolutely. So the fix here is showing velocity proof from other accounts. Maybe you're showing your direct to consumer sales data, or even sell-through success at a smaller independent before you're starting to pitch to bigger grocers, right? And so really realizing here that if your biggest selling point is we have the best coffee, you are losing that buyer's 100%. Attention.
So I want to ask you something there. People who think that grocery is going to be the solution to them not selling enough volume. Help people understand. Like I see that as people who have a terrible marriage that have a baby to fix the terrible marriage. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. And Lee, the way we describe it in Retail Ready is because we also see it's similar to this mistake, but if you have a sales problem, right? If your sales numbers are not high enough, opening more doors is not going to fix the sales problem.
Right.
There is something there. Unless truly you're in like the wrong accounts, right? Maybe you're like, oh, we're going to do it different and we're going to sell our beans in spas. And like that just doesn't land, right? That was just a bad channel strategy to start with. Okay, then like we understand why you're having slow sales. Yes, more aligned doors would probably help your sales problem, right? But let's assume that you're selling direct to consumer, and maybe you're even, you've got your own cafe or some brick and mortar and you're selling, there as well, and your sales are slow. Going into grocery is not going to fix that problem. I know why people do it. They're like, oh, I just need to get in front of more people. But that, to me, there's a red flag here where you haven't dialed in your brand promise and the messaging that resonates with your ideal consumer enough to make that purchase a no-brainer. And so I would argue, before you just try to fix it by getting more accounts, going back to your brand foundations, being like, why do we exist? Why do consumers love it? How do we convey that on our packaging, on our social media, on our website, wherever we're selling? And what are our consumers actually saying about why they are choosing our brand over other brands? And it's really a marketing deep dive, right? Where we like have to connect the dots on who's
customer
buying.
Acquisition.
Yeah, why are they buying?
Exactly.
Right. And so once we actually figure that out and you fix the sales, and not just, Lee, I want to be clear. I'm not saying that everyone has to do direct to consumer first. Right. I'm not saying that. Like you got to do what works for your own brand.
Right.
But if you are already doing direct to consumer and sales aren't working, right? Like let's work to fix that before we just think that retail's going to be the magic, the magic solution here. So really understanding that, going back to that target audience, we kick off Retail Ready with our right people, right channel philosophy. And this is realizing that the way we get on that path to profitability is understanding exactly who's buying and where they want to buy our brand, right? So again, if you go deep in your direct to consumer sales and everybody's saying, we want to buy you at Erewhon in LA, and you're like, oh, but I'm really going for Walmart, there's going to be a disconnect. So we've got to like make sure that we talk to our consumers and get in the channels where they want to buy us.
Anyone who hasn't heard of Erewhon, go and look it up, especially if you're a coffee brand that is looking at getting into grocery stores. It is just the number of memes about Erewhon on social media is worth every fucking second that you spend watching them.
Oh, they're amazing.
Smoothies for like $22, right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And Lee, it's really funny. And you'll see if you go to our Food Biz Wiz website.
Yeah.
Right on the landing page, the homepage, it says get your products into, and we've got this like scrolling marquee. And Erewhon is in that list. You know, we've got Erewhon, Whole Foods, you know, your favorite local store, because almost every brand who comes into our program says Erewhon's in my top 3 accounts that I want to get into. And, you know, I'm going to call bullshit on it. Like, Erewhon is, I love it and I hate it, right? I think it's like the darling of grocery
and
here
the dark
in the US.
of grocery.
Exactly. And it's really important to realize, talk about pay to play.
Yeah,
Erewhon over the past couple of years have really increased their pay to play programming. And I fear that they're missing out on really incredible emerging brands, self-funded emerging brands who just literally like don't have the dollars to, you know, to launch into Erewhon, to participate. Yeah.
I want to ask you about pay to play, because there's a lot of different versions of pay to play. Some people think that pay to play is I pay the business to get space on the shelf. Other people hear pay to play and they think I pay the buyer under the table for them to accept my brand. And what do you mean by pay to play?
Yes. When I've been saying it so far, I have meant completely legitimate, above board. We have it in writing. This is what you are paying to get placement on our shelves. Maybe it's in writing with your distributor. Maybe it's in writing directly with the retailer, but it is legitimate. Do I think it's right? Maybe not, but it's in writing, right? So it is above board.
Right.
There is also a huge like underground scene that happens where people are taking buyers, you know, out to dinner, out for a round of golf. But like, this is still happening. This is so ridiculous to me. Maybe they can't, and I want to be clear, like, this is illegal, right? Like, you cannot do this. It is bribery. You are not allowed to do this. But maybe instead of paying for an end cap, I'm buying that grocery buyer a new printer for their office that they've been needing. Or maybe I'm giving out Visa gift cards to those buyers. And like, it's not tracked. And, you know, I was out with a sales manager recently, and like literally in their bag of samples, they probably had like, I don't know, $20, $100 Visa gift cards that they were just rolling around with.
What?
I'm like, $2,000 in Visa gift cards that they're just kind of like, yeah. And I want to be clearly, not everyone is doing
buyers.
This. And not all buyers. I was a buyer for years and years. No one ever offered me a Visa gift card, right? Like, just, I don't know if it's because I was like a young white woman in my 20s.
Right.
Who knows? But it does happen.
We would be naive to say that this is something that doesn't happen. And especially when we're talking about mistakes that people make.
Yeah.
I have heard of people who have offered buyers those kinds of payments and they got completely never got called back again.
Right.
The meetings were shut down. Like, these are mistakes that if you're assuming that you can pay your way into a supermarket, that may not be the right way to approach it.
Yeah. And Lee, I want to be clear. Let's lead with the assumption that it's not appropriate to do that. Right. And I really want to be clear with listeners. Do not do that. Like, just because it's happening, please do not go out and buy Visa gift cards and start offering them to buyers. Right. You have far more likely of a chance that is a huge turnoff to the buyer. And then they are seeing you as a like slimy salesperson who's trying to manipulate them. And I have seen buyers now more than ever, which is so wonderful. I've seen sales conversations where brands are saying, what can we do to sweeten the deal? Right? Like, what can we do to like get this to be a yes? And the buyer will be so clear in saying, well, like, there's nothing you can do for me personally, wink, wink. And this is true, right? Like, there's nothing you can do for me personally, but I would love to see a commitment for a quarterly promotion that you're doing on our shelf.
Right.
Or I'd love to see you commit to paying for a placement in our seasonal catalog.
Right.
Great. And so we are seeing these buyers more and more saying, thanks, but no thanks. We don't play that way anymore, which is great.
Oh,
please.
Thankfully. I wish that would be the case here. Moving along. So one of the other mistakes that I wanted to discuss with you is people who think that now that I've got accepted and my brand is on the shelf, my job's done here.
Yes. Okay. So it's a huge mistake to assume that your product is going to sell itself. So the reality here is that getting into grocery is step number one, and keeping your spot on the shelf is what really matters. So a mistake that I see is brands assume retailers are going to sell their product and push their product for them, when in reality, the stores are expecting you, the brand, to drive your own sales. And again, brands get mad when I say this. They're like, but the store is responsible for the sales. And this is simply not true. The store is responsible for renting you that shelf space, essentially. And it is your job to live up to the expectations of the coffee buyer, of the category buyer. So one of the ways we fix this is we ensure that brands have a marketing strategy before you're even pitching to grocery. So thinking about, how will I support my in-store sales? And Lee, this could be anything, right? You could be like, okay, we do influencer marketing and we drive sales in store. We do coupons. We do geo-targeted Instagram ads. We
sampling,
come in and do demos. We provide the coffee in the staff break room. Like, we had a brand who did that here in San Francisco, and no coincidence, they were our #1 selling brand on the shelf because our entire team, right, our 120 staff members of that store,
bought the coffee,
drank their coffee daily. So when a shopper was standing in front of the coffee section and they said, hey, like, what's great?
They pointed
9 times
at
out
that
of
one.
10, that staff who literally doesn't know much about coffee, right? They're like, I don't freaking know. They're like, oh, this one. Like, I had this morning and it's really great, right? So it can be anything, Lee, here. Like, I don't care what your marketing plan is. It just has to be something, right? Like, decide, figure out what works for your brand. So a marketing plan, expecting to run promotions, like ads, field marketing to build velocity there. I think about shelf talkers being really,
what is shelf
really
talkers?
Important. So it is a little business card size laminated signage that go in front of your beans. And so this was a big change that I made to the coffee category back at Buy Right, where I was like, okay, we need shelf talkers for each individual SKU in the coffee section. Especially, back 2009, 2010, like, people were just learning about coffee in the Bay Area, understanding, okay, there are different brew methods. There are, I mean, gosh, like what's a single origin coffee? Like, and how does this change the flavor profile? What do I like? What do I not? Like, how is it processed? Like, all of these things were new to the consumer. And so adding, and we're still having these conversations today, but adding a shelf talker, little business card size that says the flavor profile, the ideal brew method, maybe something about the processing.
Can you put a QR code on there?
You could put a QR code on there.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Maybe, source from female farmers, like whatever your brag worthy thing is. What do you want the consumers to know? But recognizing not all brands do this, right? Like a lot of brands are like, oh, we're not going to bother with that expense. But a confused consumer doesn't make a purchase.
There's so much
overwhelmed
choice.
Consumer, right, in front of that wall of coffee, doesn't make a purchase. So how can we think about visual merchandising in that wall of coffee? And how can we make it easy for the consumer to understand what we've got in our bags and why they should choose us? And so we might have a consumer who's like, oh, like AeroPress is my jam. I only like brew coffee in my AeroPress. And so they're looking at those shelf talkers, and all of a sudden, if you've got a little icon of the AeroPress in the corner of your shelf talker, they're like, oh, those are the beans for me. Decision made.
I'm vegan. Please don't hate me, everybody. But the reason I mention that is because whenever I'm going to look for anything in a supermarket, if you are putting vegan on there and you are immediately capturing my attention, and not enough brands do that. I have to pick up things to check if something is vegan, or somewhere in tiny little corner it says suitable for vegans. But the brands who make it very easy for vegans to see the stuff that they eat on their packaging, you're capturing my attention immediately. So I really identify with that thing that you're saying about the AeroPress. Like you call your consumer in and separate yourself out. You make that customer journey much easier.
100%. And the vegan, that's such a great example, Lee. Like, imagine if you were looking at a wall of yogurts. And there was one with shelf talker that said, our newest vegan yogurt made from coconut milk. You'd be like,
or just
great.
Plant-based on it. That's
plant-based.
It.
Plant-based. Yes.
Yeah.
And I want the listeners to recognize too here that we can go overboard with the certifications. And
you tread careful, lady. I love these. Go for it.
I'm not saying to get a bunch of certifications and put it on the front of your coffee bag. What I am saying is a shelf talker can be really helpful in having the shopper understand if that like particular SKU of beans is for them, right? For that novice coffee drinker who is looking at that wall of coffee and doesn't know the difference flavor-wise, the flavor profile difference between Ethiopian beans and Brazilian beans, we got to tell them. Because they're going to buy that bag of Ethiopian beans and get home and be like, what is this?
Right.
I don't like this. Maybe they'll love it, but maybe they won't. And so we just set expectations and help them make a decision. So, Lee, here we were talking about that mistake of assuming that your product's going to sell itself, and taking the time here before you get into grocery to have the marketing strategy of how am I going to touch the staff, the consumer, and the buyer at each retail location so that it helps drive sales.
Love it. Love it. Now, the next step of this journey is in our podcast series is, what do people most need to prepare for getting into grocery? So we've set it up perfectly. Join us for the next episode, folks. Peace, love, and peanut butter. Have an amazing rest of your day. I really hope you enjoyed this episode, friends. Please don't forget to show us some love by subscribing, liking, commenting, and most of all, sharing this podcast with your friends. Check the show notes for links, including our sponsors and our Patreon. And stay tuned for more great conversations on the Daily Coffee Pro by Map It Forward.